Hello everyone. My name is Elise. I hope you're all doing so good today. Thank you for coming to visit my channel. I'm happy to be spending some time with you, and we are going to be doing my January wrap up today. Can't believe the first month of the year is already over. It went by so quick, and we have 10 books to get into. Now, if you saw my January TBR, you'll know that January tends to be a month of catch up for me, particularly around library books and library holds. So in the month of January, I always look at all of the holds that have languished in my library app for the year, and I say like, okay, I'm gonna accept a bunch of these, and whatever I get to in January, I get to, and the rest of them are no longer gonna be on my holds list. So I definitely did that, and it's reflected in the books because there are a lot of library books. I think of the 10, only 3, I'm looking at my laptop, only 3 I think were like my own physical owned books, and the rest were all from the library. So not great for my books in and out goal, but you know, we were reading, and I typically do like to flush out the library holds, so I have a lot of space for new ones for the year. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, I'm going to start with the first book I read in the month and then go to the most recent book that I read. The first book was a holdover from the last year. So I was reading it at the end of the last year and finished it up in January. And that is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This is published by Knopf. And this was one of my 5-star predictions, and it was 5 stars. This book was so good. This was my favorite book of the month, spoiler. I loved other ones in this month as well, but this was definitely my favorite. So it was great to start off the year with such a good book. This one follows a couple, Yejide and Akin, and they kind of meet, fall in love, and get married. And you enter the story in which Akeem has taken a second wife, and he's very much been pressured to do so by his family, particularly his mother, but that is something that they stated that they would never do. So Yejide is very upset by this, and it sort of throws their relationship into chaos, and you see what happens from there. It does go back and forth in the timeline, and this takes place in Nigeria, so it is, you know, somewhat common to have a polygamous relationship. But yeah, they're both really struggling with this new setup. And let me tell you, this book is so plotty. Like, this was a wild ride. There's so many things I'm not going to get into here because it would be spoilers, and I think it's better to go in without knowing. But oh my God, there is so much plot happening, and the drama. The writing is also spectacular. The character development and character building is really well done. And you could just like perfectly visualize everything that the author was talking about. So I very much enjoyed this. Highly recommend you read this if you haven't already. And I know this is like right in time for their next novel to come out. So I'm very much interested in that as well. So that is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. The next book that I read was An Unexpected Peril, and this is by Deanna Raybourn. This is book 6 in the Veronica Speedwell series, and this is published by Berkeley. So again, in my TBR, I said, you know, this is the month I'm going to catch up in the Veronica Speedwell series. So I'll just say I also read An Impossible Imposter, which is book 7, and book 8 is coming out in March. So I was trying to get prepared for book 8 to come out. I very much enjoyed both of these. I just adore this series. It's Sherlock Holmes-esque, but it follows Veronica Speedwell, who is very intelligent, mischievous, and it is a lepidopterist, and her life is in danger, but she doesn't know why. And this man finds her and says like, hey, I need you to trust me. I'm trying to help you out. I'm going to try and protect you and try and figure out why these people are trying to kill you. So he leaves her in the protective custody, let's say, of Stoker. And Stoker is very gruff. He is also very intelligent. He is a taxidermist, but he used to be a doctor, and he had a fall from high society because he got divorced. This takes place in 1800s Victorian London. So it's very atmospheric. It's very funny. And yeah, it's just adventurous murder mysteries. There's also a little bit of like subplot of a romance in there as well. So know that going in, but I love that it's done very well within these books. So yeah, that is the series. This one might have been one of my least favorite in the series. It had a doppelganger situation, which is very fun, but I think just like was never going to be my favorite. It's very cheeky, but still very much enjoyed, even if it is the least favorite in the series for me. And then this one was kind of like back into a little bit of what I love, and it has them going on adventure elsewhere away from their home. So loved these, adore them. Much kisses to Veronica Speedwell, and I can't wait for the 8th one. So those were the next two. Following that, I read this Picante Beef Baby. So this is Blankets by Craig Thompson, and he wrote and illustrated this. It's a graphic memoir, and I actually didn't know that this was nonfiction. When I first picked it up, I thought it was a graphic novel, but it is nonfiction, and this was way darker than I thought it was going to be. Like, this was very dark and touched on a ton of difficult themes, so look up trigger warnings before you get into it. But this follows pretty much his like childhood and adolescence until he moves out of his parents' house. And a bulk of this story is about another like young woman, girl in high school, and they have a very like intense connection. It's kind of his first love, and they really are each other's like harbor in all of the darkness that each of them has in their lives. And that part was very like poignant and like realistically remembered. Like the amount of detail that he remembered around that was insane. So I very much enjoyed that and learning about her life as well. This also has a lot to do with him and his family, specifically his brother and the relationship that they had growing up. A complicated relationship, but a loving one nonetheless. And yeah, there's also abuse going on in here, neglect. I mean, like there's so much going on. I will say this was hard to read, not just for the subject matter, but it's a little dated. This got released in like, it was like serialized, I believe, starting as far back as 2003. So there are definitely some things that are dated within this. So go in knowing that like there's some language that we would not use today. And also it deals with what I think is sexual assault. It's like he alludes to sexual assault seemingly several times in this, but then like doesn't say anything else about it. It's like very like quickly glossed over, and I just wasn't sure what to make of that. I left a little confused, and not to say that he needs to talk about that in detail, but I was left confused the way it was written in. So who knows, take that for what it's worth. But overall, I think the art is beautiful. It's very detailed. And yeah, I enjoyed this story. Happy that I finally got to it. So that is Blankets. And this one is published by Top Shelf. All right, next one we have is a library book. So I'll put it up here. And that is Empty Smiles. And this is by Katherine Arden. This is the 4th novel in her middle grade horror quartet called The Dark Spaces Quartet. And this one is published by, this one is published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. And yeah, this was the final one in the collection. I think it did a good job of wrapping it up. It was very action-packed and directly correlated to the 3rd one. So the 3rd one's the only one that leaves on a cliffhanger. Follows a group of 4 new friends that encounter the Smiling Man, and he tries to trick children into coming into his realm and being trapped there forever. It's about them trying to escape his grasp. So this was good. I'm happy to be done with it, to be honest. I think for me, as like not someone who's in, middle school, was like slightly maybe too much for me to read, but I did really appreciate like the middle grade horror aspect. I think that's so fun. I didn't even know that existed when I was young. So I think it's perfect for middle grade readers. If I was more of a middle grade reader, this might have impacted me a little bit more, but yeah, I enjoyed it for what it was, and think that it's a very good option for people who are wanting to read middle grade. So that is Empty Smiles. All right, the next one that we have is a little short story collection that I've been eyeing for a while on my shelves, and that is Family Album. And this is by Gabriela Alemán, and this is translated from the Spanish by Dick Cluster and Mary Ellen Fieweger. So this is published by City Light Books, which is a great little indie publisher. And this was overall pretty good. I definitely loved the story Marriage the best. I love stuff about complicated marriages. That is just like catnip for me. I love it. And that did it so interestingly. The one that has maybe like visually stuck in my mind though is about this woman who basically tries to pretend that she is royalty and moves onto this island. It's supposed to be a critique on colonialism, and she basically, convinces everyone that she is royalty and then slowly starts taking over the island in some dark ways as well. That one was really atmospheric. It talks about Ecuador. This author is from Ecuador. Talks about Ecuador in like a really vivid, rich way, like the rocky landscape on the sea and the jungle behind it. It's just so stark and like hot and oppressive. It was so good. So some stuff in here I really, really enjoyed. There were some that like I couldn't tell you about now. I don't remember them. But overall, I think it's a really interesting collection. And on the back, it sort of ties them together with themes. It's like noir-ish. So I think it's supposed to have like a dark comedic bent to it. If you're into that, this might be a good one to pick up for you. So that is Family Album. All right, next up we have Magma. And this is by Thóra Hjörleifsdóttir, and it's translated from the Icelandic, I believe, by Meg Matich. And this one is published by Picador. And this was hard to read. So this is basically just all about abuse. It is slim, which thank God, it kind of needs to be. Yeah, this is a first person like perspective on a woman who is in an abusive relationship, and man, is she in it. Like, oh man, she is just being like gaslit left and right. She's totally lost her sense of self, and like you're reading it from her perspective. So it is so heartbreaking to just see her believe everything this man is saying and just have no sense of self-worth and feel trapped and feel, just like increasingly more and more depressed. It's horrific to read, honestly, but I do think it's, an important depiction of one example of what it's like to be in an abusive relationship. And it is short, so I've been putting it off because I knew it would be hard to read, but I'm glad I read it. And would still recommend this to anyone that feels up to doing that. But that is Magma. Next up, we have a nonfiction, and that is the Premonitions Bureau, and this is by Sam Knight, and the subtitle for this is A True Account of Death Foretold. This one is a little confusing because Sam Knight is like a journalist, and he's writing about a psychiatrist who started this Premonitions Bureau back in the day. So it's sort of like there's a lot of narrators going on because really he's writing about the psychiatrist whose name is John Barker, but then Sam inserts himself at some points, and that was a little bit confusing to me. I wish he hadn't have done that, but that's really my main critique. The rest of it I very much enjoyed. I thought it was fascinating. So this follows John Barker, who's a psychiatrist who starts to believe in the potential of precognition or like premonitions. And he begins doing research around whether or not people can predict disasters in the future. And the reason why he does this is originally there is this natural disaster of basically like a giant mudslide in a town that he is working in. And many, many people die. There had been these warnings from people who had like prior to that event said like, oh yeah, I like told someone about this dream I had that sort of predicted it, or I had this like horrible feeling this day, or like I saw darkness, or like my little child told me like they didn't want to go to school that day because something bad was going to happen. And a school was like unfortunately where a lot of the victims from the mudslide were, because it went over an area where there was a school. So he starts this Premonitions Bureau and gets enough funding for a period of time to basically allow people to write in their premonitions that they think they're having, and then they follow up on them and see if they come true. So it's really fascinating not only to see, you know, what the public thought of this, what people are writing in, how they go about tracking it. It's very loosey-goosey, but they start to discern two seers in particular that seem to be able to have visions that come true. And some of them are like scary specific. Like there's one where a man predicts that a plane is going to crash, and he predicts like the number of people that are going to die on that plane and like other details about it, and then that ends up happening like to the exact number of people. It's wild. Just fascinating to think about precognition, and even like some of the real theoretical work that people do around precognition. And then also the large leap that it is from like theoretical to practical, and what we would even do with that information if it did exist. So very fascinating. I highly recommend if you're just looking for something that is like very page turnery, and the truth is stranger than fiction, definitely. So that is the Premonitions Bureau by Sam Knight, and that one is published by Penguin. Next one we have up is another library book. And that is Address Unknown, and this is by Katherine Kressmann Taylor. It also has an introduction by Margot Livesey, and the introduction is very well done. I would highly recommend it. It gives you good context for the story. And this one is published by Echo. This is very slim, so under 100 pages, and this is sort of a critique on Nazi Germany, but it's told through letters. It shows friendship between someone who is Jewish and someone who, at the start of Nazism, is slowly becoming entrenched in that world, and their friendship getting torn apart. It also explores this idea of surveillance as blackmail. It explores lots of really interesting stuff in such a small little novella, and I loved this. I thought this was so great. It is scathing and dark, but like weirdly the tone is light. It's like kind of bizarre in that way, like incongruent, but I very much enjoyed it. I think that this I liked even more than Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I enjoyed that as well, but I think this is better. If you like Small Things Like These, I highly recommend you pick this one up. I think it's fantastic. I won't tell you anymore because it's so short, but loved it. And then the last book that I read is Ducks, and this is by Kate Beaton, who I think used to go by Katie. Sometimes she refers to herself by Katie in the book, but here she goes by Kate, so I'm gonna say Kate. And this is published by Drawn and Quarterly, who did her previous graphic work as well, which is Hark a Vagrant, which is also great if you've ever read that. But this is another graphic memoir about her time working in the Canadian oil sands. This was also hard to read. Like both of these graphic nonfictions I read this month were hard to read. Again, trigger warnings, lots of heavy themes. Ugh, God. So it talks about the industry as a whole and the environmental impacts of this industry, but also like the economic impacts of this industry. So like the pros and the cons of that. It talks about a little bit about the way that this industry is impacting Indigenous people in Canada. This takes place in Alberta, where she is at. And then mostly it just talks about the toxic work culture in these camps that she lives in. When you work there, there's just a rampant amount of sexism and misogyny. There's sexual assault in this. I mean, it's just grueling to read, honestly. This is over 400 pages, and it was hard to read that many pages of this. I think that overall everything was really well done, and I think it's a really important story for people to read. And I think it was a little too long. I do think that there was some pacing issues, and just like sometimes it was a slog to get through. And I know part of that is probably because like it's so pervasive, like you're meant to sit in it because that's how pervasive it is. And for me, it was like bordering on too much. So I will say that go in with caution, but it is very well done. And I think it's an important story to tell. And if you don't know about this industry, kind of an important topic to become aware of. So that is Ducks by Kate Beaton. And that is the January wrap up. So let me know what you read in January, and let me know what your favorite book was as well. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Bye.